Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Green White Checker with Jordan Farrell here as we just wrapped up the Xfinity 500 at Martinsville Speedway, the penultimate race of the 2023 NASCAR Cup Series season. Knew we didn't get to do one of these last week simply because I was not feeling very well. My voice was kind of weak, so I wasn't able to do a recording after the race last week, so missed out on it, but that's okay. We'll get back to it this week. All right, so with Martinsville, obviously it's always going to be interesting and it's always going to be super chaotic. Uh, Out of all the races that have playoff chaos, which is weird because all of them have been super chaotic, it seems like, this one by far is probably the one that always has the most of it because naturally it's the cutoff to get into the championship four. It's a last chance desperation heave that always produces such interesting moments like last year when the Ross Chastain did the Hail Melon, put the car full send going through turns 3 and 4 there on the last lap, get around two cars. Ended up eliminating Denny Hamlin from the playoffs and ended up getting him into the transfer spot to get into the championship four on points. A move that unfortunately was banned by NASCAR, despite the fact that it was probably one of the best things to happen to the sport in a very long time. I don't want to get into a debate on that right now, but simply put, sometimes NASCAR should just leave certain things alone. I know there's a safety concern there. If he had a lost control, he could have taken out a lot of the field. But NASCAR can't do that, and then also look at what happened at the end of the Xfinity race yesterday and say that's just okay because Sheldon Creed, it may or may not have been his fault in the end, but he ended up turning the entire front straightaway into a junkyard yesterday on that last lap. Maybe it is that he kind of got up into the tire rubber and just couldn't hold it through the turn. Maybe he did brake check. We'll probably never know unless you are Sheldon Creed exactly what happened there, but it was enough to tick off Richard Childress and it was enough to cause quite a bit of controversy. But that's enough on the Xfinity race. Let's go back to the Cup Series. Obviously, we've seen the short track racing product not be very good, and a lot of that has to do with a couple of different factors. Obviously, the aero package is something that NASCAR is working on and will continue to work on until they can get it right. They tested a few different things back at Richmond back in July. One of them was the new tire compound. They're using a slightly harder tire that the drivers that were involved in that test back at Richmond back in July kind of determined that this harder tire compound was the one that produced the best competition, the biggest, most noticeable difference in competition that allowed them to stick a little bit more and help them to be able to drive the car into the corners a little bit better, put down rubber a little bit better. And so NASCAR decided to go ahead and implement that change so that they could have a better product going forward on the short tracks, particularly here at Martinsville, here at this last race. So they had a harder tire compound and one that put down a little bit more rubber on the track, particularly in the preferred groove. And it opened up the doors for some much more interesting racing. We saw all day long Ryan Blaney, in particular, using it with a lot of success. Martinsville is a hard enough track to pass on, short track package stinking or not, just because it's just that type of track. It's one where it's classic racing. What you're doing is you got to chase down the guy in front of you. That's what racing is. If you're the guy in front, you want to hold the guy off behind you. If you're the guy chasing him down, you're chasing him down no matter how long it takes, no matter what you have to do. That's racing in a nutshell. That's particularly short track racing in a nutshell. But with this, Martinsville's a track that's particularly hard to pass on the outside on, regardless of how hard it is to pass in general. And Ryan Blaney was able to make it work a couple of times today. I mean, all day long, it seemed like it was between him and Denny Hamlin up there at the front. They'd go on like a 5-10 lap long side by side battle for the lead that would eventually end with Ryan Blaney prevailing. Twice out of that, he had to do it by passing him on the outside. And so with this the new tire, it seems like it put a lot of rubber down at the bottom. That early on, Dale Earnhardt Jr. and the guys that were in the booth and the TV broadcast were saying that it was best that the drivers try to avoid going over that because it's kind of like hitting ice. It'll make your car kind of slick and make you lose a little bit of control. Maybe that kind of fed into it a little bit because once you get up on the outside of somebody, you force them to where they can't really straddle that line anymore. They have to ride down as low as they can to avoid getting up into you and causing a big mess. So maybe that kind of played into it. But either way, it played into Ryan Blaney's favor. Again, he was able to use that outside line with relative ease most of the race long, and it ended up benefiting him as he ended up getting the win in the end in this one. But coming in here, besides the tire compound, besides the short track package and the racing product, if you look at the statistics between the three of them, Ryan Blaney, Martin Truex Jr., and Denny Hamlin, by far the three best drivers at Martinsville. By and large, it's Ryan Blaney's best track. So if you're Ryan Blaney, you had to feel really confident, even if you didn't get a win today, that you would be able to run well enough to be able to point your way in after what you were able to do over the last couple of weeks. Ryan Blaney's just really turned it on over the course of the last couple of weeks and with the playoffs, and he did a really good job today of ended up winning the race. But even if he hadn't, like I said, he would have pointed his way in really easily. And that's because he runs really well at Martinsville. It's by far his best track. He has the best average finish out of all of the playoff drivers coming into this one there. I think he was like an average finish of 9.5. And yeah, obviously the most wins between all of the active drivers there were between Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex, but really that's simply because they're the two that had the most starts there at Martinsville Speedway. So either way, you still can't count either of those two out, and those two were a factor here. I mean, had Truex got the pole, another concern coming in with this was Truex got the pole. His average speed was like 95 mile an hour in his qualifying run where he got the pole. Obviously, with it being a half mile, tight turn, narrow, short track, the average speed is going to be slower. It's not going to be in the hundreds, but his qualifying speed was actually slower than the previous average, and so it kind of, if you were going off of that alone, you had to thought that maybe that would bode not so well for this race. You think it might have made it a little bit of a snooze fest, but luckily that didn't end up turning out to be the case. Just going on through what happened in the race here, again, going back to Truex getting the pole, qualifying speed was a little bit slower, but it turned out to be far from what it looked like it was going to be. Truex led the first 50 laps of the race. Then Denny Hamlin finally caught up to him in lap traffic, was able to get around him. There was about 19 to go in the stage. Ryan Blaney just kind of surged by Truex there on the outside, took second place. Then Hamlin still went on to go win the stage. That ultimately put a lot of pressure on William Byron. Byron just did a very good job of overcoming pressure all day long. The setup on his car was just absolutely terrible, and yet if you're a fan, it's hard to necessarily look at this and think, well, obviously that the crew chief must have messed up there or something. And the reality is, if you know anything about the sport, that the setups are a big guess coming in. You have a certain car that you set up for each type of track. You have a short track car, you have a road course car, you have your super speedway car, and you have a car you dedicate for your mile and a half. So you would have been using your short track package car, and most of the time when they go to set these up, they set it up based on how they did it at the previous race, how they've done it when it's worked really well at that particular track in years past, or how it's worked at similar tracks in the same year. And so they use information based on all of that to determine what kind of initial setup they want to use going in. Yeah, obviously, that's something that is decided by the engineers and everybody back at the shop as they're preparing during the weeks leading up to the race. It's not necessarily a crew chief thing, although the crew chief has a little bit of a say in it. But as it gets into the race, if you realize that that particular setup you're running is not going to work, then the best that you can do as a crew chief and a driver is to just kind of adjust, like you make in-game adjustments in football. Yeah, make your halftime adjustments, make your adjustments on the fly, and just try to see if you can get the car to be at least a little bit more comfortable if you can't get it fully fixed. In this case, William Byron was never able to get the setup right. They never were able to get it fixed. And in that situation, especially if you're the crew chief, Rudy Fugle did a really good job. He's done a lot of really good strategy calls throughout the season that have paid off, that have proven that he's a good crew chief. But he also does something really well, and that is that he is almost like a coach. And you have to look at your crew chief in that manner. Your crew chief basically is the coach of the team. A lot of people want to just kind of give all the credit to the driver when the teams are doing well, when they're winning races, when they're succeeding. But they're called race teams for a reason. Everybody from the driver on down to the pit crews to the people back in the shop, they're all athletes. They're all working really hard, and they are all putting in a lot of effort and training in order to do really well at what they do. Obviously, the engineers and mechanics back at the shop, a lot of people won't tend to think of them as athletes, but the guys in the pit crew in particular, they train like football players. A lot of them are former Division One college football players in particular. Some of them might even be former NFL players. They put in a lot of training, a lot of effort, and everything, and everybody on that team is putting in some sort of work in order to try to help the team be successful. The credit doesn't necessarily always go to the driver, the crew chief, etc. So at the end of the day, it's a team effort, and some of it also has to fall on the crew chief in order to kind of be like the coach of that team, especially when it comes to calming drivers down. Because in this kind of situation, when all the pressure's on you, like it was on William Byron all day long, if you're the crew chief, all you have to do is basically be like a psychiatrist or a coach calming down a. Let's just kind of use it in baseball terms since the World Series is going on. a pitching coach going to calm down a young pitcher that's just given up a big home run, and now you're finding yourself trailing in a big game and that you may need to win. You have to go and calm him down and do whatever you can to get him to settle down, settle his nerves so he can settle back in and get back on track. Well, if you're the crew chief, that's something you have to excel at too. And Rudy Fugle all race long was like, look, I know it sucks. I know the setup sucks. I know it's frustrating, but you just got to go out there and give it everything you can. And he just continually kept reminding William of that all race long. And William Byron did give it his best effort all race long in order to come back to win. We'll jump a little bit more into the specific things that he had to do in order to get there. So he continued to review what went on, but that was just a little rabbit hole I had to go down there. But going back to what happened, here's another thing that happened with him. So he got no stage points there at the end of stage one, which was won by Denny Hamlin. That put a lot of pressure on him, put him in a situation where he would either need to win the race or he would have to race hard, try to get back ahead of Denny Hamlin. So things kind of got worse for him as we got into the second stage. Tyler Reddick nearly spun out again right in front of him after he got loose, kind of upset his tires. A lap before that, in the same spot, he got down into Kyle Larson. That's what upset his tires, and then he almost spun out right in front of William Byron, which really would have pretty much ended his hopes right there if they ended up having a wreck. But luckily, he was able to get it going and able to keep it straightened out there. But it slowed up William Byron enough to where it just continued to not help himself out there. Going back to what was going up at the front, well, we talk about Ryan Newman doing typical Ryan Newman things. Newman is hard to pass, particularly when he's fighting to stay on the lead lap. He held up Denny Hamlin in traffic that enough to where it allowed Ryan Blaney to catch up to him at the halfway point of stage two. Once again, Ryan Blaney used that outside line, got around him for the lead, and you kind of have to again give credit to the tire compound for this one because it really helped Ryan Blaney to stick it right there. That battle went on for a couple of laps, but in the end, Blaney was able to continue to hold his line there. He was able to stay ahead of him by a nose, and eventually he was able to clear him. So you just had to give some credit to the tire compound there for holding up. Because in years past, the guy on the inside line not only would have had the advantage, but if you were running in the outside, eventually you would have either gotten up in the marbles or you would have blown a tire. And it was able to hold out. So it turned Martinsville into a two groove track there for a race for the lead. Truex's championship four hopes later on were basically done in. They came in into the second caution of the race. Christopher Bell ended up spinning out Ryan Newman. Speak of the devil, a few laps later, he kind of got into his left rear quarter panel and turned him around. Christopher Bell, kind of inexperienced with racing against Ryan Newman, I guess, didn't realize he's not going to just let you around him. You're basically going to have to punt him, and he kind of did. He dumped him more or less, got up on his left rear quarter panel and turned him around, brought out the second caution flag there. And at the time, Ryan Blaney dropped two spots on pit road. He's had troubles on pit road. It's no secret that his pit crew has struggled in a lot of situations all season long. So he dropped a couple spots, ended up coming off pit road in third, but Martin Truex got caught speeding on pit road, had to come in and serve a penalty. Because of that, it allowed Blaney to restart in second and kind of may or may not have salvaged the day for him. But unfortunately, because of Truex, he just kind of for Truex, he never recovered from this. He ended up kind of getting mired in traffic, and that basically ended his hopes of making it into the championship four from there out. But on the ensuing restart there, Blaney and Hamlin had an epic battle for the lead, went side by side for the longest time. Blaney finally cleared him with about 30 to go in the stage, and Ryan Blaney goes on to win stage number two over Denny Hamlin. William Byron once again did not get any stage points here. He was told again by Rudy Fugle that he would need to finish 18th or better to get in after that stage. And luckily for William Byron, that ended up changing as the race went on. As once the green came back out there, he made up two spots over the next couple of laps before the next caution came out. And that was able to put him above the cut line over Denny Hamlin. So he was just over him by about a couple of points. And he was able to hold on the rest of the race because Denny Hamlin just wasn't able to pick up the spots, and he was for some reason or another. William Byron just kept getting lucky and just kept doing just enough to stay ahead of the line. Once again, he wasn't able to get the setup fixed. He wasn't able to make the passes, but it just kept having situations where somebody would have to pit, or he would do just enough to where he would stay ahead, stay on the lead lap. He did end up going a lap down late, but he did just enough to where he was able to stay in the top 15. And that was enough. Even though he had such a bad day, that was enough for him to be able to move on to the championship four. So again, just a tough, hard fought day for William Byron. If he goes on to win the championship, it will have been one that he has truly earned based on what he had to do today. And so just credit to William Byron, credit to Rudy Fugle and that entire crew for what they were able to do there. But going back to what was happening in the race here, after two more caution flags, you kind of had a quagmire of pit strategy that came out there. Ended up seeing Chase Elliott take the lead because he decided to stay out. You saw a lot of guys that decided to go ahead and start taking the gamble of taking either no tires or two tires. Eric Almirola did it. He took no tires. Kyle Larson didn't take any tires. Chase Briscoe took two. Chris Buescher, Ricky Stenhouse didn't take any. Todd Gilliland took two. And then you finally start seeing guys taking four. It starts with Bubba Wallace, Denny Hamlin, and Ryan Blaney. They all took four, but they were mired back in traffic for the next 50 or so laps. And really, that's where you saw this race kind of take a turn for the boring. It was entertaining for most of the way through up to this point, and then it just kind of got boring for a while. Chase Elliott seemed like he was just kind of cruising around the track at that point. It, Eventually, his tires did drop off enough, and he eventually kind of got inside the fuel window where he had no choice to come into pit. That ended up costing him. He finished 17th, but he ended up losing the lead eventually to Eric Almirola. And this whole entire time, while Eric Almirola's leading, Ryan Blaney's just kind of slowly picking guys off the entire time. And eventually, that tire drop off and fuel strategy stuff, plus Ryan Blaney just being the fastest car on the track, he ends up taking the lead with 23 to go, holds on to win. So unfortunately for Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex, both of them were eliminated. For Denny Hamlin, he will now continue to remain the best driver not to have won a championship, and he'll continue to try to search for that first championship. As we don't know how much longer he's going to be racing. Obviously, we know he's got a few more years in him. Yeah, but it just depends on if he wants to try to go ahead and get a head start and just going ahead and focusing on being an owner, if he wants to try to continue to race more and more to try to win that championship. He said in post race that he enjoys it. He still loves doing it. So obviously, there's not going to be a talk of him retiring anytime soon. But for Denny Hamlin, just absolutely frustrating to once again come so close to at least making it to the championship four and having a shot at winning a championship, to being eliminated in the penultimate race of the season once again in just a stunning way, especially after you had one of the most solid cars on the track all day long. Then I guess again for Martin Truex, kind of the same thing. You had the fastest car in qualifying. You had a good car all day long, but in the end, you end up coming up short as well. So Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex eliminated. Sets up your championship four to be Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, William Byron, and Ryan Blaney, as they will duke it out next week at Phoenix for the 2023 NASCAR Cup Series Championship. And it looks like it's going to be a fun one next week in the desert. All right, that will do it for Green White Checker this week for Martinsville. We'll see you next week.